It was around 2 a.m., the kind of dead hour when even the night itself seems to be asleep, when I was driving home from my girlfriend's place, exhausted but eager to get to my own bed. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a dark, narrow highway cutting through deep, suffocating woods, and the further I drove, the more the silence began to feel heavy, pressing in on me, wrapping around me like something alive. My car was the only thing moving for miles, its headlights cutting weakly through the fog that had started creeping in from the trees, thick and unnatural, slithering across the pavement as if trying to swallow the road itself. My radio had lost signal 15 minutes ago, the last station dissolving into garbled static before I shut it off completely, leaving me with nothing but the sound of my tires humming against the road and the occasional chirping of crickets from the darkness beyond. That's when I saw her. A woman standing on the side of the road, just beyond an old broken mile marker, illuminated by my headlights as I rounded the curve. She was completely still, barefoot, wearing a long white dress that looked damp and tattered, as if she had been walking for miles or had just crawled out of a river. Her hair was long and wet, hanging over her face in dark, matted clumps, and though I couldn't see her features clearly, I could tell she was staring right at me. My stomach twisted into knots. Everything inside me told me to keep driving, that something was wrong, that stopping would be a mistake. But I didn't. My foot hesitated on the gas, and before I even realized what I was doing, I was already slowing down, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. I never pick up hitchhikers, never, but something about her just felt off, like she had been waiting for me, like she had been expecting me. My heart was pounding as I pulled over, the gravel crunching beneath my tires. My window was cracked just enough to let the cold night air seep in, and I called out, "Hey, do you need help?" But she didn't respond. She didn't move. Not a twitch, not a shift, nothing. Just standing there, blank and lifeless. I should have driven away. I should have left her there. But instead, I reached over and unlocked the passenger side door. Slowly, with the eerie smoothness of something not quite human, she stepped forward, her bare feet making no sound against the pavement, and without a word, she slid into the seat beside me, the door clicking shut behind her. A wave of freezing cold filled the car the instant she got in, my breath fogging up in front of me, and suddenly, everything felt wrong, like the world had shifted slightly, like I was no longer driving down the same road I had been on a moment ago. My chest tightened as I gripped the wheel, my pulse thundering in my ears. "Where are you headed?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm, but she didn't answer. She just sat there, staring straight ahead, her hands folded neatly in her lap, fingers as pale as bone. My stomach churned. The silence stretched too long, unnatural and heavy, pressing down on me. "Miss," I tried again, my voice barely above a whisper now. That's when she turned her head. It was slow, too slow, as if someone were rotating her by an invisible hand, her neck creaking ever so slightly. And then, in a voice that sent ice shooting through my veins, she whispered, "He's coming." I stiffened. My fingers clenched around the wheel so tightly they ached. "Who?" I whispered, afraid of the answer. But she didn't respond. She just kept staring at me, her dark, hollow eyes locking onto mine, empty, yet filled with something ancient, something that felt wrong, something that made my skin crawl and my stomach lurch. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shadow in the trees, a massive shape, twisted and unnatural, just beyond the tree line, running alongside the car at an impossible speed. My mind couldn't make sense of it. Too tall, too thin, too fast, its limbs stretching and bending in ways that defied everything I knew about movement. My breath hitched in my throat. My vision blurred for half a second, and when I blinked, the thing was closer. My whole body screamed at me to go, to get away from whatever was out there. But when I slammed my foot down on the gas, The car didn't accelerate. The engine choked, sputtered. It felt like something was holding it back, like invisible hands were gripping the car, keeping it from moving forward. My pulse was hammering so loud I could hear it in my skull, and beside me, the woman whispered again, "He's coming." Over and over and over, her voice like the rustling of dead leaves, like wind through a hollow place. The shadow outside was right next to the car now, and I swear to God, I saw it reaching. For me, long fingers stretching toward my window. The air inside the car was so heavy now, pressing against my chest, squeezing the breath from my lungs. The headlights flickered. The radio screeched with static. Then, suddenly, everything went black. The engine died. The lights cut out. My body locked up in pure, primal terror as the car coasted into total darkness, the road disappearing beneath us. I fumbled for the keys, frantically turning them in the ignition, but nothing happened, not even a click. The woman beside me stopped whispering. I turned my head slightly, my breath stuck in my throat, and saw that she was gone. The seat was empty. My heart felt like it stopped. I whipped my head around, scanning the back seat, the road outside, the trees. Nothing. The door hadn't opened. There was no way she could have left. And then I saw it. In the rearview mirror. A shape. Sitting in the back seat. I couldn't move. My fingers were frozen around the wheel, my eyes locked onto the mirror, unable to blink, unable to breathe. The shape was there, but it wasn't human. It was watching me. I finally forced myself to turn around, but there was nothing there. The back seat was empty. My breath came in sharp, uneven gasps, my skin ice cold. My shaking hands fumbled for the keys again. Turn, turn, turn. The car suddenly roared back to life, the lights flaring on, the radio blaring nothing but static. I didn't hesitate. I slammed my foot on the gas, the tires screeching as I tore through the night, not daring to look in the mirror again. I drove like a madman, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles went white, my entire body still numb with fear. When I finally reached home, I stumbled inside and locked every single door and window, my hands still trembling so hard I could barely turn the deadbolt. I didn't sleep that night. I barely slept for a week. The next morning, I told my dad what happened. He went pale. That stretch of road, he told me, had a history. Decades ago, a girl had drowned in the river nearby after her car crashed into the water. They never found her body. Since then, drivers have seen her hitchhiking in the same spot, always alone, always disappearing before reaching her destination. And the thing that follows her? No one knows. But those who see it don't last long. It's been years now, and I still avoid that road. But some nights, even now, I wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, because I hear whispering outside my window. He's coming. I had been working late that night, another long shift at the office, and by the time I finally left, it was nearly midnight. The parking lot nearly deserted, except for a few scattered cars and the dim glow of flickering streetlights. The air was unnaturally cold for a summer night, the kind of deep chill that seeps into your skin and makes you feel exposed, vulnerable, like something is just out of sight, watching. I couldn't shake the feeling as I walked toward my car, my footsteps echoing too loud in the silence, the shadows stretching too far under the streetlights. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and kept my keys clutched in my hand, my thumb hovering over the panic button. But I saw nothing unusual, just the quiet stillness of an empty lot. Still, my nerves were on edge. Something felt wrong. My car was parked at the far end, right beneath a light that flickered every few seconds, casting long, twitching shadows across the pavement. As I approached, I had this overwhelming sense of unease, like I wasn't alone, like there was something in the back seat waiting for me. I paused, staring at my car through the flickering light, my pulse hammering for no reason I could explain. I shook my head, forcing out a nervous laugh. "You're being paranoid. Just tired. Just overworked." but the feeling wouldn't go away. I reached for the driver's door, but at the last second, I hesitated, and without really knowing why, I yanked open the back door first. My breath hitched. The seat was empty. Relief flooded through me so fast, I almost laughed at myself, shaking my head as I slammed the door shut. Just my imagination messing with me. I climbed into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and started the engine. But even as I pulled out of the lot, the unease lingered. The road stretched out ahead, dark and empty, barely lit by the occasional passing streetlight, and the further I drove, the heavier the air inside the car felt. It was a long ride home, nearly an hour, and most of it was on quiet highways and long, winding back roads. Usually I didn't mind. I liked the drive. It gave me time to unwind. But tonight was different. The silence felt oppressive, the road ahead too empty, the darkness beyond the trees too thick. I kept glancing at my mirrors, half expecting to see something behind me, but there was nothing. Just the black stretch of highway, my headlights carving a lonely path through the night. I reached for the radio, needing to break the silence, but the second I turned it on, static filled the car. Not just the usual white noise, something else was mixed in. A faint, garbled whisper. My fingers tightened around the dial. My breath stilled. The whisper was faint, just beneath the surface, like someone was speaking too softly to hear properly, their voice distorted and distant. I turned the volume up, straining to make out the words, but the second I did, the whisper stopped. The static cut out. The radio went dead silent. A shiver crawled down my spine. My stomach twisted. I switched it off. My hands were gripping the wheel too tightly now, my knuckles aching. The air inside the car felt thick, pressing in around me, and even though I knew it was just my nerves getting the best of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then I stopped at a red light, and I looked in the rearview mirror, and I saw him. My breath caught in my throat. A man was sitting in my back seat. I felt my whole body lock up, every muscle seizing in pure primal terror. He was barely visible in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, but I could see the outline of his face. Pale, gaunt, his features sharp and sunken, like he hadn't eaten in weeks. His eyes were too dark, deep pits that swallowed the light, and he was staring directly at me through the mirror. His mouth was slightly open, like he had just whispered something. I hadn't heard my back door open. I hadn't felt anyone get in. I had locked my doors. My pulse spiked, my breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. My fingers were still gripping the wheel, but they felt numb, like my body had stopped belonging to me. I wanted to turn around, to see if he was really there, but my instincts screamed, "Don't look, don't turn around." My heart was hammering so loud I thought it might burst. Then, in the mirror, he smiled. Not a human smile. His lips stretched too far, his teeth sharp and jagged, too many of them, like they had been filed down to points. The red light turned green. My body reacted before my mind did. I slammed on the gas, my tires screeching against the pavement as I tore down the empty road. My breath was coming in short, panicked bursts. I refused to look in the mirror again. I knew he was still there. I could feel him. The air in the car felt wrong, like it wasn't just me breathing anymore. The silence was too deep, the weight of another presence pressing against my skin. I gripped the wheel so tightly my hands ached. My phone vibrated. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I fumbled for it with one shaking hand, my eyes darting between the road and the screen. Blocked number. My throat went dry. The buzzing stopped. Then it rang again. Same blocked number. My fingers trembled as I swiped to answer, pressing it to my ear, barely able to breathe. Silence. And then, in a low, distorted voice, someone whispered, "Don't turn around." My body went rigid. The voice wasn't coming from the phone. It was coming from inside the car. My vision blurred. The world tilted. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely keep control of the wheel. I tried to focus, to keep driving, but something in the rearview mirror moved. I nearly lost control of the car. The headlights flickered, the engine sputtered, the whole vehicle shook as if something heavy was moving in the back seat. My hands were slick with sweat, my breath shallow. The road stretched endlessly ahead, but it felt like I was going nowhere, like the darkness was swallowing me whole. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The weight in the car lifted. The air felt lighter. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. The phone in my hand went dead. My heart was still racing as I sped toward the nearest gas station, pulling into the brightly lit lot, my entire body trembling. I threw the car into park and turned, finally, to check the back seat. Nothing. But the seatbelt was buckled. My stomach dropped. I didn't move for a long time. Just sat there, gripping the wheel, staring into the darkness beyond the gas station lights, too afraid to close my eyes, too afraid to breathe. I never drove that road alone again, and I never get into my car without checking the back seat, because I know he was real, and I know he might come back. I was driving home late from work, like I did every night, the same long route I had taken for the past 6 months, a mix of open highway and winding back roads that cut through empty fields and thick patches of trees, a road so isolated that some stretches didn't even have streetlights. It wasn't that I liked driving alone at night. It was just part of the job, something I had gotten used to, something I had trained myself to ignore, the creeping unease that always settled in after midnight when the roads felt too empty, too silent, too unnatural. The hum of my tires against the asphalt, the soft murmur of the radio, it was the only company I had. That night, everything had started normally. The sky was clear, the air was crisp, and I had just pulled onto the highway, settling in for the long drive, when I noticed a car in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was just a set of headlights in the distance, another traveler on the same lonely road, maybe someone heading home like me. But then, something about it felt off. The headlights were too bright, almost blinding, even from a distance, and they didn't move like normal headlights. They flickered strangely, like they weren't quite real, like they were shifting somehow, distorting against the night. I kept glancing at my mirror, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel. The car was getting closer, fast. Within seconds, the lights were almost right on top of me, so bright they flooded the inside of my car, making the road ahead seem darker, emptier, stretched out in a way that didn't feel right. I expected the driver to pass, but instead, they pulled up right behind me, too close, tailgating aggressively, their high beams blinding me. My stomach tightened. There was no reason for them to be driving like that. No other cars on the road, no traffic, just me and them. I tapped the brakes lightly, trying to signal for them to back off, but they didn't. They sped up. My pulse spiked. The lights grew brighter, hotter, filling my mirrors, reflecting against the windshield, washing everything in white. I couldn't see the car itself, just the lights, almost like it wasn't a car at all, just a set of floating headlights with nothing behind them. My skin crawled. Something was wrong. I switched lanes, expecting them to speed past me, but they followed, perfectly. Every move I made, they mirrored. I sped up. They sped up. I slowed down. They slowed down. My breath came in short, sharp gasps now, my hands slick with sweat. I kept glancing in the mirror, trying to see who was driving, but I couldn't make out anything beyond those blinding lights. I was trapped between fear and logic, my mind racing to come up with an explanation, some rational reason for what was happening. But there wasn't one. It didn't make sense. Nothing about it made sense. I was going 90 miles per hour now, my heart slamming against my ribs, and they were still right behind me, their lights pressing in, suffocating me, turning the road into a tunnel of blinding white. Then my phone rang. My stomach dropped. I glanced at the screen. Blocked number. My throat went dry. I let it ring. It stopped. then rang again. Same blocked number. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel tighter. My instincts screamed, "Don't answer," but my shaking hands betrayed me. I pressed the button, lifting the phone to my ear. Silence. Not even static. Just nothing. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, a voice, low, distorted, wrong, whispered, "Pull over." My entire body locked up. My vision blurred. I nearly swerved off the road. "Pull over now," the voice repeated, breathy and unnatural, like it wasn't coming from the phone, like it was coming from inside the car. I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The car behind me honked, a long, drawn-out honk, like a warning, like a demand. Then the lights cut out. My breath caught in my throat. The road went pitch black. No headlights, no taillights, no sign of the car at all. I blinked, my heart hammering against my ribs, my fingers twitching against the wheel. It was gone, just like that. 1 second, right on my bumper. The next, nothing. Just darkness stretching behind me, the empty highway vanishing into the night. I exhaled shakily, trying to slow my racing pulse, my mind scrambling for an explanation. Maybe they had turned off somewhere. Maybe I had imagined it. But then, in the distance, I saw them again. Ahead of me. My stomach twisted into knots. There was no way they could have gotten ahead of me, not unless they had been waiting. The headlights flared back to life, and my entire car shook. The steering wheel jerked in my hands. The engine stuttered. The air grew heavy, thick, suffocating. And then I saw something else, something behind the lights, a shape, a dark, towering shape that wasn't part of the car at all, something that moved, something that watched. I didn't think. I just reacted. I yanked the wheel hard, my tires screaming as I swerved onto an exit ramp, barely keeping control as my car hurtled toward the nearest gas station. My breath was coming in sharp, ragged gasps, my body drenched in cold sweat. I pulled into the lot and threw the car into park, my entire body trembling as I slammed the door open, stumbling onto the pavement, gasping for air. The gas station was empty. No cars, no people. Just the buzzing of the fluorescent lights above, casting a cold, sterile glow over the pavement. I turned, my heart pounding, expecting to see those headlights coming up the road, expecting to see that thing waiting just beyond the trees. But there was nothing. Just silence. Just the empty road. My car sat idling behind me, the engine humming softly, like nothing had happened, like it had all been in my head. I wiped my face, trying to steady my breathing. Then, slowly, cautiously, I glanced at my phone. One new message. My chest tightened. My fingers hovered over the screen. I didn't want to open it. I knew I shouldn't open it. But I did. There was no text, no number, just a single image, a photo, taken from the back seat of my car, looking at me. I stared at the photo on my phone, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps, my fingers trembling so badly I almost dropped the device. The picture was taken from inside my car, from the back seat. It was grainy, the kind of blurry low-light image that made the shadows seem deeper, made the edges of things blur together, but it was unmistakable. The frame was angled perfectly, staring straight at me as I gripped the steering wheel, my own wide-eyed face captured mid-panic, the dim glow of the dashboard barely illuminating my features. My mind short-circuited. I had been alone in the car, hadn't I? My stomach twisted into knots, nausea rolling over me in waves as I forced myself to scan the image, to look closer. And then I saw it. In the far left corner of the frame, just barely visible in the darkness, something else was there. A shape, a figure, the outline of a face just beyond the edge of the shot, hollow eyes, skin too pale, lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Watching me, waiting. My entire body locked up, an icy numbness spreading through my veins. This wasn't possible. There was no way. I would have seen them. I would have felt them. I spun around, my pulse hammering, my eyes darting to my back seat, my car door still wide open, the interior bathed in the harsh white glow of the gas station lights. Empty. Nothing. No sign that anyone had been there at all. But that photo, it had been taken seconds ago. My mind raced, my thoughts spiraling out of control, panic creeping into every cell of my body. Someone had been in my car. Someone, or something. I needed to leave. Now my hands were shaking as I shoved my phone into my pocket, my body still buzzing with adrenaline. I stepped toward my car, hesitating only for a moment, scanning the darkened edges of the gas station lot, half expecting to see those blinding headlights waiting for me just beyond the tree line. But the road was empty. The night was still. Too still. Like the whole world had paused. I swallowed hard and slid back into the driver's seat, locking the doors the second I was inside. My breath was shaky as I gripped the wheel, forcing myself to focus. Just drive. Just get home. Get away from here. I turned the key in the ignition. Nothing happened. The engine didn't even try to turn over. Just silence. Thick. Suffocating. My stomach dropped. No, not now, not here. I twisted the key again, my hands slick with sweat. Nothing. Not even a click. My headlights were still on, my dashboard still glowing. My car wasn't dead. It just wasn't responding. I felt my chest tighten, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Then, behind me, the gas station lights flickered. I froze. The buzzing overhead dimmed for half a second, the entire lot dipping into darkness before the fluorescents hummed back to life, casting their cold, sterile glow across the pavement once more. My grip tightened on the wheel, my knuckles aching. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. That same crushing presence, that same heavy pressure in the air. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to check my mirrors. And that's when I saw them, standing at the edge of the lot, just beyond the reach of the gas station lights. A figure, still, motionless, watching. The shadows clung to them, their features obscured, but I could make out just enough to send ice crawling up my spine. They were too tall, their arms too long. Their head was tilted slightly, like they were considering something, like they were waiting for me to move. My heart slammed against my ribs. I didn't breathe, didn't blink. They took a step forward. I fumbled for my phone with shaking fingers, my hands moving on instinct, snapping a picture before I could even process what I was doing. Click. The camera flash illuminated the lot for a fraction of a second. Too bright, too sharp, and the figure was gone. My breath hitched. My mind refused to accept what I had just seen. 1 second they had been there, watching me, and now, nothing. The space where they had stood was just an empty stretch of cracked pavement. My vision blurred. My pulse roared in my ears. Then my phone buzzed. I flinched so hard I nearly dropped it. New message. No number. No sender. Just a single text. Don't look up. My stomach dropped. My hands clenched around the phone so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I didn't want to. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to keep my head down, to start the car, to drive without stopping, without thinking. But something inside me, something I couldn't control, made me do it. I looked up, and there they were, standing right outside my window. My breath froze in my throat, my vision tunneling as I locked eyes with the figure, or at least where its eyes should have been. There was no face, just darkness, a void where features should be, a shifting, writhing absence of light that made my stomach turn, my mind rebel against what I was seeing. The shape was tall, its head tilted ever so slightly, its 2 long arms resting at its sides, fingers twitching like it was waiting for something, like it was testing how long I would sit there before I screamed. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers went numb, my knuckles bone white. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to look away, to run, to do something. But I was frozen, trapped in the crushing silence between heartbeats, between thoughts, between the space of what I understood as reality and whatever the hell was standing outside my car. Then, slowly, painfully, it raised one hand. Not all the way, just a fraction of an inch, its fingers curling slightly, twitching. The movement was subtle, unnatural, and then it knocked. A single light tap on the glass. Just one. Software, almost gentle. I think that's what made it worse, that it was playing with me. My vision blurred. My breath came in ragged, stuttering gasps, but I still couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't think. The world had gone silent. No sound, no wind, no hum of the gas station lights. Just that single, deafening moment where all of existence seemed to hold its breath. Then, my phone buzzed again. New message. No number. Just 2 words. Open up. My stomach lurched. My whole body convulsed in a desperate, terrified movement as I dropped the phone, my hands trembling so violently they barely functioned. I slammed the lock button on the door, even though I knew it was already locked. But the motion gave me something to hold on to, something human in a moment that felt like reality itself was unraveling. The figure outside didn't move. It just stood there, waiting, watching. And then, I swear to God, it smiled. Not a normal smile, not even a human one. Just a slight widening of where its mouth should be, stretching too far, too thin, too wrong. And suddenly the car shook, not violently, just once. A soft jolt, like something had climbed into the back seat. My entire body locked up. A deep, soul-crushing dread clawed its way up my spine, every instinct screaming at me, "Don't look, don't turn around, don't. But I felt it, the presence, behind me, something breathing. The car's interior had gone ice cold, my breath fogging in the air, the temperature dropping so fast I could feel my skin tightening, goosebumps rising across my arms and neck. My vision swam. My lungs refused to work. There was something in the car with me. I didn't move. I couldn't move. I just sat there, staring straight ahead, my hands clenched so hard around the steering wheel that my nails dug into the leather. The figure outside was gone. But I knew it hadn't left. It had just changed places. The silence pressed in, suffocating, waiting. Then, in the rearview mirror, I saw it. A shadow, a shape, just out of focus, just behind my seat. Something sitting there, not moving, not speaking, just waiting. My stomach turned. My pulse pounded against my skull. My hands were shaking so violently that I thought they might slip from the wheel. I wanted to scream, to throw the door open and run, to do anything but sit there, trapped in my own goddamn car with whatever had crawled inside. But I couldn't. The weight of that thing behind me felt like a physical force, pressing against my skin, against my ribs, like it was sinking into me. My vision blurred. I thought I was going to pass out. Then my phone buzzed again. Another text message. Drive. My breath hitched. I could barely get air into my lungs, but my fingers moved on instinct, fumbling to shift the car into drive, my foot slamming against the gas pedal so hard that the tires squealed against the pavement. The car lurched forward, the sudden motion snapping me out of my trance, just enough for me to realize that I was crying. Tears streaked my cheeks, my vision hazy as I sped onto the road, gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. The headlights carved through the dark, illuminating the empty stretch of highway ahead, but I didn't dare look at the mirror again. I didn't need to. I could feel it. Still there, still waiting, still watching. The road stretched on endlessly, an infinite loop of blackness swallowing the edges of my vision. The gas station had disappeared behind me, lost to the void. The trees on either side of the road felt closer now, pressing inward, bending at unnatural angles, their branches reaching like fingers desperate to pull me in. The sky was wrong, too dark, too empty. I had no idea where I was driving. I had no idea if I was even going anywhere at all, but I couldn't stop. I knew that much. I couldn't stop. The car groaned beneath me, the engine struggling against some unseen force, but I kept my foot pressed to the floor, pushing faster, faster, faster. My pulse roared in my ears, my skin damp with cold sweat, my hands slipping against the wheel. I risked a glance at the dashboard. The clock was wrong. The numbers had stopped making sense, flashing symbols, backwards digits, a time that didn't exist. My phone buzzed. Another message. Almost there. My throat closed. I tried to scream. I don't know what happened next. I don't remember the moment it ended. All I know is that I woke up slumped over my steering wheel, parked outside my house. My hands were still gripping the wheel. My phone was dead. The car engine was still running. The clock on the dashboard read 3:33 a.m. My stomach lurched, the events of the night flooding back all at once, my entire body trembling as I threw the door open and stumbled onto my driveway. I nearly collapsed, my legs barely working, my lungs fighting for air. The neighborhood was silent. The sky was normal. The road was just a road. No sign of headlights, no sign of them. But when I turned back to look at my car, my stomach dropped. The backseat seatbelt was buckled, and written in the condensation on the inside of the window, written from the inside, was a single word. Soon. I stood there, my legs barely holding me up, my breath coming in shallow, uneven gasps as I stared at the single word written in the condensation on the inside of my car window. Soon. My entire body locked up. My mind refused to process it, refused to accept that the message had been left from inside my car, that someone, or something, had been in there with me, sitting in the back seat, close enough to reach out and touch me. I swallowed, my throat dry, my pulse hammering so loudly in my ears that I almost didn't hear it at first. The sound, the soft clicking noise, it was coming from my phone. I forced my trembling fingers to pull it from my pocket, my vision still hazy, my skin slick with cold sweat. The screen was black, dead, completely unresponsive, but the speaker was on, and something was breathing. A slow, rhythmic inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, right into my ear. I dropped the phone. My breath hitched, my vision swimming as I stumbled backward, away from my car, away from my phone, away from everything. My body was running on pure instinct now, my mind shutting down every logical thought, every explanation. I was on my porch before I even realized I had moved, my fingers fumbling with the keys, desperate to get inside, desperate to put a barrier between me and whatever the hell was happening. The second I got the door open, I slammed it shut behind me, locking every deadbolt, every chain, my hands shaking so violently that I could barely function. I pressed my back against the door, my chest heaving, my lungs burning. The house was silent, too silent. My breathing was the only sound, echoing in the darkness. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't move. I just stood there, listening, waiting, my pulse pounding against my ribs. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. But at some point, I must have moved toward the window, toward the thin crack between the curtains, my curiosity betraying me. I couldn't help it. I had to look. And when I did, my heart stopped. My car was still sitting in the driveway, right where I had left it. The windshield reflected nothing but darkness, the street empty, the world outside still and quiet. But the backseat light was on. I hadn't turned it on. My stomach twisted into knots so tight I thought I might vomit right there on the floor. Because even though I couldn't see into the car, even though the glass was slightly fogged, I could feel it. Something was sitting in the back seat, waiting. I slammed the curtain shut. My body was shaking uncontrollably now, my mind spiraling, my breath coming in sharp, ragged bursts. I wanted to believe that this was just some kind of exhaustion-induced hallucination, that I was just tired, just overworked, just paranoid. But I knew better. I felt it. Something had followed me home. Something had been in the car with me for God knows how long. And now it was waiting. I couldn't sleep, wouldn't sleep. I paced my house all night, jumping at every sound, checking every window, every door, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But nothing did. The hours dragged on in agonizing silence, and by the time the sun started creeping over the horizon, I almost let myself believe it was over. That maybe I had imagined it. That maybe the exhaustion and fear had twisted my mind into something irrational. But then my phone buzzed. The screen was still dead, still black. But there was a new message. No number, no sender, just one last text. You brought me home. The air left my lungs. My fingers went numb. My body stopped working. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. Because I knew in that moment that this wasn't over. It had never been over. And whatever I had picked up that night was still here. Watching, waiting, for me to open the door, for me to get back into the car, for me to drive again.